Ex-husband's girlfriend. Stalked my kids at school. She's now in prison. My ex's girlfriend stalked my kids at school. She got 5 years. He lost everything. Your new mommy is here to take you home. Those were the words my 6-year-old daughter Emma heard when a complete stranger approached her at Franklin Elementary's playground. My name is Cassandra White. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a family law paralegal in Denver, Colorado. That Tuesday afternoon at 3:47 p.m., while I was stuck in traffic rushing to pick up my kids, a woman I'd never met was trying to convince my children to leave with her. What I discovered next would turn my messy divorce into a criminal case that destroyed my ex-husband's life completely. I didn't panic when the school called. Not at first. Mrs. Henderson, the principal, had a controlled urgency in her voice that made me focus rather than fear. Mrs. White, we need you here immediately. There's been an incident with Emma and Jake, but they're safe. As someone who'd spent 8 years working in family law, I'd seen enough custody disputes go wrong to know that incident could mean anything from a playground fight to something much worse. The drive to school felt endless, but my legal training kicked in automatically. I called my supervising attorney, Margaret Torres, and put her on speaker while driving. Maggie, I'm heading to the kids' school. Something happened during pickup. Can you conference in Detective Rodriguez from the Family Crimes Unit? Just in case. Margaret had been through her own custody nightmare 5 years earlier, and she didn't ask questions. Consider it done, Cass. I'm also sending paralegals Jennifer and Alex to meet you there. Document everything. When I arrived at Franklin Elementary at 4:23 p.m., I found Emma and Jake sitting in the principal's office, looking confused rather than traumatized. Emma had her arm protectively around her 4-year-old brother, and that image burned itself into my memory. Mrs. Henderson immediately pulled me aside while the school counselor stayed with my children. Mrs. White, at approximately 3:40 p.m., a woman approached your children near the pickup area. She told them she was their new mommy, and that she was there to take them home instead of you. Emma remembered your instructions about strangers and brought Jake directly to me. Mrs. Henderson's voice was steady, but I could see the concern in her eyes. The woman followed them, insisting she had permission. When I asked for identification and custody documentation, she became agitated and left quickly. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. My divorce from Marcus had been finalized just 3 months earlier, and while it had been contentious, we'd managed to work out a custody arrangement without involving the courts too heavily. Marcus had been seeing someone new. He'd introduced Rachel to the kids exactly twice during supervised visitations at his apartment. But approaching them at school, claiming to be their new mommy, that crossed every line imaginable. Did anyone get a license plate? Video footage? I asked, my paralegal training overriding my maternal panic. Mrs. Henderson nodded grimly. Our security cameras captured most of the interaction. The woman was driving a red Honda Civic, and we have clear footage of her license plate. I've already called the police, and they should be here shortly. Detective Sarah Martinez arrived at 4:51 p.m., and I immediately recognized her from several cases we'd worked together. She took one look at me and shook her head. Cassandra, please tell me this isn't connected to your divorce. When I explained the situation, her expression grew serious. We're treating this as attempted custodial interference at minimum. Depending on what the footage shows, we might be looking at attempted kidnapping charges. The security footage was damning. Rachel Morrison, as we later identified her, had not only approached my children, but had actually taken Emma's hand and tried to lead both kids toward the parking lot. Emma's quick thinking and my repeated safety lessons had prevented what could have been a nightmare scenario. But watching that footage, seeing a stranger try to take my babies, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. That evening, after the police had taken statements and I'd gotten Emma and Jake settled at home with extra hugs and their favorite dinner, I did what I do best. I started building a case. My ex-husband Marcus had some explaining to do, but I wasn't going to confront him emotionally. I was going to approach this like the legal professional I was, methodically and thoroughly. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new case file. Morrison White incident, attempted custodial interference. Then I started making calls. My first call was to Dr. Patricia Nguyen, the family therapist who'd been working with Emma and Jake to adjust to the divorce. If this incident had traumatized my children, I wanted professional documentation. My Second call was to Margaret Torres asking her to research Rachel Morrison's background. My third call was to Marcus. Cassandra? It's almost 10 p.m. What's wrong? Marcus sounded genuinely concerned, which threw me off initially. When I explained what had happened, his response surprised me. What? No, I never told Rachel to pick up the kids. Jesus, Cassandra, you know I wouldn't do that without calling you first. His shock seemed genuine, but I'd learned not to trust my ex-husband's reactions during our marriage. Marcus, your girlfriend tried to kidnap our children. She told them she was their new mommy and tried to take them from school. This is being investigated as a felony. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Finally, Marcus spoke, and his voice had changed completely. Look, she's been having some adjustment issues with our relationship. She's been pushing for more involvement with Emma and Jake, but I told her it was too soon. I had no idea she'd do something this crazy. Something in his tone made my legal instincts ping. He was downplaying this, which meant he either knew more than he was admitting, or Rachel had been exhibiting concerning behavior that he'd been ignoring. Adjustment issues? Marcus, she committed a felony. She's going to be arrested. And depending on what the investigation reveals, your custody arrangement might be in jeopardy. I kept my voice level and professional, but inside I was furious. Our children had been put in danger because he couldn't properly vet his girlfriend or set appropriate boundaries. The next morning, I took a personal day from work and started my own investigation. Margaret had already pulled Rachel's background check. Rachel Morrison, 28 years old, worked as a receptionist at a dental office, had been dating Marcus for approximately 4 months. No criminal history, but 2 previous restraining orders, filed against her by ex-boyfriends. One for harassment, one for stalking behaviors. Marcus had been dating a woman with a documented pattern of stalking, and he'd introduced her to our children. My phone rang at 11:15 a.m. Detective Martinez's voice was grim. Cassandra, we arrested Rachel Morrison this morning at her workplace. During questioning, she made some statements that concern me. She admitted to approaching your children, but she claims Marcus told her it was okay. She also mentioned that she's been watching Emma and Jake at school for several weeks, learning their routines. The room seemed to tilt around me. She's been stalking my children? It appears so. We're pulling security footage from the school for the past month. Cassandra, there's something else. When we searched her car, we found child car seats that had been recently purchased, children's clothes in Emma and Jake's approximate sizes, and a notebook with detailed information about your kids' schedules, their friends' names, their teachers' name, even their favorite snacks. I had to sit down. This wasn't an impulsive mistake or poor judgment. Rachel Morrison had been planning to take my children, and she'd been preparing for weeks. Detective Martinez, what are the charges? We're starting with attempted kidnapping in the 2nd degree, stalking, and custodial interference. Depending on what else we find, there could be additional charges. Her bail hearing is set for tomorrow morning. I'd recommend you and the children stay somewhere else tonight, just as a precaution. I called my sister Linda immediately. She lived in Aurora, about 20 minutes away, and she'd been my anchor throughout the divorce. Lynn, I need to bring the kids over for a few days. It's serious. I didn't want to explain over the phone, but Linda heard something in my voice and didn't ask questions. Come now, I'll make up the guest rooms. That afternoon, while Emma and Jake were safely at Linda's house watching movies with their cousins, I drove to Marcus's apartment. This conversation needed to happen face-to-face, and I needed to see his reactions when I told him exactly what his girlfriend had done. Marcus lived in a trendy downtown loft that had cost him nearly half our joint savings in the divorce settlement. When he opened the door, he looked like he hadn't slept. Cassandra, thank God you're here. I've been trying to reach Rachel all morning, and the police won't tell me anything except that she's been arrested. She's been arrested for attempting to kidnap our children, Marcus. And it wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. She's been stalking Emma and Jake at school for weeks, taking notes on their routines, buying car seats and clothes for them. She was planning to take them. I watched his face carefully as I spoke. The color drained from his features. No, that can't be right. She mentioned wanting to surprise them with gifts, but stalking? Planning to take them? Cassandra, you have to believe me. I had no idea. Did you know about the restraining orders? The stalking charges from her previous relationships? Marcus's expression told me everything I needed to know. He'd known, or at least suspected, and he'd chosen to ignore it. She told me those were misunderstandings, jealous ex-boyfriends who couldn't handle her being affectionate. Marcus ran his hands through his hair. Oh God, Cassandra, what have I done? Are Emma and Jake okay? Are they traumatized? They're scared and confused, Marcus. Emma keeps asking why the strange lady knew their names and why she said she was their new mommy. Jake hasn't spoken about it yet, but he's been having nightmares. I paused, watching him process this. There's going to be a criminal trial. Our children will likely need to testify or at least be interviewed by child psychologists. Marcus sank onto his expensive leather couch, his head in his hands. What can I do? How can I fix this? You can't fix this, Marcus. Your girlfriend is a stalker who tried to kidnap our children. The best thing you can do right now is cooperate fully with the police investigation and stay away from Emma and Jake until this is resolved. I stood to leave, but something nagged at me. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Did you ever, in any way, even jokingly, tell Rachel that she could be the kid's mother? Did you ever discuss her picking them up from school or taking care of them? The pause before his answer told me everything. We talked about the future, about what it would be like when we got married, how she could be a stepmother to Emma and Jake, but I never ever told her to approach them at school. I never said she could take them anywhere without your permission. When you got married? I stared at him. Marcus, you've been dating this woman for 4 months, and you're already discussing marriage and her being a stepmother to our children? After what we just went through with our divorce? Rachel's different, Cassandra. She understands what I need in a way that you never did. The words were out of his mouth before he could stop them, and I saw him immediately realize his mistake. Something crystallized in that moment. This wasn't just about Rachel Morrison being unstable. Marcus had been painting me as the obstacle to his happy family, probably complaining about custody arrangements and my unreasonableness. He'd created an environment where Rachel felt justified in trying to take my children because he'd positioned her as their real mother and me as the problem. I see. I kept my voice level. Well, Marcus, I hope Rachel's understanding nature serves her well in prison, because that's where she's going. I headed for the door, then turned back. Oh, and Marcus, I'll be filing for an emergency modification of our custody agreement. After this incident and your poor judgment in bringing an unstable woman around our children, I'll be requesting supervised visitation only. I left him sitting in his expensive apartment staring at the wall, but I wasn't done. Not even close. As I drove back to Linda's house, I was already planning my next moves. Rachel Morrison was facing criminal charges, but Marcus had enabled her behavior, and he was going to face consequences too. That evening, after I'd tucked Emma and Jake into bed at Linda's house, I opened my laptop and started drafting documents. The emergency custody modification was just the beginning. I was also going to request a full psychological evaluation of Marcus, a thorough investigation of his living situation, and mandatory co-parenting classes before any unsupervised visitation could resume. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Martinez. Cassandra, Rachel Morrison made bail this afternoon. Her trial is set for 6 weeks from now. I strongly recommend maintaining your current security precautions until then. I forwarded the text to Margaret Torres and added, Maggie, I need you to file the emergency custody motion first thing tomorrow. Also, can you research whether Marcus could face any criminal liability for enabling Rachel's access to our children? Margaret's response came within minutes. Already drafting the motion. And yes, if we can prove he was aware of her instability, or gave her information that facilitated the stalking, he could potentially face charges as an accessory. I'll look into it. The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind of legal preparation and trying to maintain normalcy for Emma and Jake. The children had to be interviewed by Dr. Amanda Foster, a child psychologist who specialized in cases involving stranger danger and potential kidnapping. Dr. Foster's report was thorough and damning. Both children showed signs of anxiety related to school pickup. Emma had developed hypervigilance about strangers, and Jake had regressed in his toilet training due to stress. Meanwhile, Margaret's investigation into Marcus's potential liability had uncovered some disturbing information. Text messages between Marcus and Rachel showed that he had, in fact, shared detailed information about our custody schedule, the children's school, their extracurricular activities, and even photos of them in their school uniforms. He'd also complained extensively about me to Rachel, painting me as an overprotective, controlling ex-wife who was keeping him from his children. More damaging still, Margaret had tracked down Rachel's previous victims, the ex-boyfriends who'd filed restraining orders. Both men were willing to testify about Rachel's escalating pattern of behavior and how she'd used information from her relationships to stalk and harass them. One of them, David Chen, had particularly relevant testimony. Rachel had tried to insert herself into his relationship with his young niece, claiming she could be a better mother figure than the child's actual mother. The custody hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks before Rachel's criminal trial. Judge Patricia Kowalski had a reputation for being tough but fair, especially in cases involving child safety. I'd appeared before her several times in my paralegal work, and I knew she didn't tolerate any behavior that put children at risk. Marcus had hired attorney Richard Stone, who had a reputation for being aggressive in custody cases. But as Margaret and I prepared our case, we felt confident that the facts spoke for themselves. Marcus's poor judgment had directly endangered our children, and the evidence was overwhelming. The morning of the custody hearing, I dropped Emma and Jake off with Linda and arrived at the courthouse at 8:30 a.m. Margaret was already there, along with Detective Martinez and Dr. Foster. We'd also subpoenaed Dr. Nguyen, who could testify about the children's emotional state both before and after the incident. Marcus arrived with his attorney at 8:45 a.m. He looked haggard and nervous, which was a stark change from his usual confident demeanor. Richard Stone looked like he knew he was fighting an uphill battle. Judge Kowalski called our case at 9:15 a.m. sharp. This is an emergency motion for modification of custody in the matter of White versus White. Ms. Torres, you may proceed. Margaret's opening statement was concise and devastating. She laid out the timeline of Rachel Morrison's stalking behavior, the attempted kidnapping, Marcus's role in enabling access to the children, and the ongoing threat to Emma and Jake's safety and emotional well-being. Your Honor, Mr. White introduced a woman with a documented history of stalking behavior to his minor children after dating her for less than 4 months. He then provided this woman with detailed information about the children's schedules, school, and activities. When Ms. Morrison used this information to stalk the children and attempt to abduct them from school, Mr. White's first response was to minimize her behavior and make excuses. This represents such a fundamental failure of judgment that unsupervised custody cannot continue. Richard Stone's response focused on Marcus's rights as a father and argued that he couldn't be held responsible for his girlfriend's criminal behavior. But when Judge Kowalski started asking specific questions about the text messages and Marcus's knowledge of Rachel's previous restraining orders, Stone's arguments crumbled. The testimony phase was even worse for Marcus. Detective Martinez presented the evidence methodically, the security footage, Rachel's notebook with detailed information about the children, the text messages between Marcus and Rachel's confession that she'd been watching the children for weeks. Dr. Foster's testimony about Emma and Jake's psychological state was particularly compelling. She'd interviewed both children multiple times and had clear documentation of their anxiety and behavioral changes following the incident. But the most damaging testimony came from David Chen, Rachel's ex-boyfriend. He testified via video link about Rachel's pattern of becoming obsessed with children in her romantic relationships and her belief that she could be a better mother than the children's actual mothers. She started asking detailed questions about my niece after we'd been dating for about 3 months, David testified. She wanted to know what school she attended, what her schedule was, what her favorite foods were. When I brought my niece to a family barbecue, Rachel immediately positioned herself as the primary caregiver, even pushing my sister aside when she tried to help her daughter. After we broke up, Rachel showed up at my niece's school, claiming she was there to pick her up for me. Fortunately, the school had strict pickup policies. When Marcus took the stand in his own defense, Richard Stone tried to portray him as a loving father who'd made an error in judgment. But under cross-examination from Margaret, the full extent of Marcus's poor decision-making became clear. Mr. White, you were aware that Ms. Morrison had 2 previous restraining orders filed against her, correct? She told me those were misunderstandings. Did you verify her explanation? Did you contact the men who'd filed these orders? No, I trusted her. You trusted a woman you'd been dating for 4 months with information about your children's safety and security? I thought I loved her. Mr. White, in your text messages to Ms. Morrison, you referred to your ex-wife as controlling and overprotective, didn't you? Those were private conversations. You also wrote, and I quote, "The kids would be better off with someone who actually wants to be a mother," referring to Ms. Morrison, correct? Marcus's face flushed red. I was frustrated with the custody arrangement. So you were actively encouraging Ms. Morrison to see herself as your children's mother, despite the fact that you'd been divorced for only 3 months and had been dating Ms. Morrison for 4 months? I may have gotten carried away. Margaret continued methodically dismantling Marcus's credibility for another 20 minutes. By the time she was finished, it was clear that Marcus hadn't just used poor judgment. He'd actively created the situation that led to Rachel's stalking and attempted kidnapping. Judge Kowalski's ruling was swift and uncompromising. Mr. White, your actions in this matter represent such a fundamental failure of parental judgment that I cannot allow unsupervised custody to continue. You provided a woman with a documented history of stalking behavior, detailed information about your minor, children's schedules and activities. You encouraged this woman to see herself as your children's mother after knowing her for only 4 months. When she used this information to stalk your children and attempt to abduct them, your initial response was to minimize her behavior. Custody is immediately modified as follows. Mr. White's parenting time is suspended pending completion of a comprehensive psychological evaluation and a parenting fitness assessment. Any future contact with the minor children must be supervised by a court-appointed supervisor at a designated facility. Mr. White will be responsible for all costs associated with supervision. Additionally, Mr. White is ordered to complete a domestic violence intervention program, a co-parenting class, and individual therapy focused on relationship boundaries and child safety. Until these requirements are completed and he is deemed fit to resume parenting responsibilities, he will have no unsupervised contact with Emma and Jake White. Marcus's face went white as Judge Kowalski continued. Furthermore, Ms. Morrison is prohibited from having any contact with the minor children, directly or indirectly, and from coming within 500 feet of their school, home, or any location where they may be present. Mr. White is specifically ordered not to provide Ms. Morrison with any information about the children's activities or whereabouts. As we left the courthouse, Margaret touched my arm. Cassandra, I've never seen a more clear-cut case of parental unfitness. Marcus won't be getting unsupervised custody back anytime soon, if ever. But the legal victories were just beginning. 2 weeks later, Rachel Morrison's criminal trial began. The prosecuting attorney, James Liu, had built an airtight case. The security footage, Rachel's detailed notebook, the purchased car seats and children's clothing, and testimony from her previous victims painted a picture of a woman who'd been planning to take my children for weeks. Rachel's defense attorney tried to argue that she'd been mentally unstable, and that Marcus had led her to believe she had permission to approach the children. But Rachel herself destroyed that defense when she took the stand. I love those children more than their real mother does, Rachel testified, her voice growing stronger and more agitated as she spoke. Marcus told me how neglected they were, how Cassandra didn't appreciate them. I could see it when I watched them at school. They needed someone who truly cared about them. Ms. Morrison, you've testified that you watched them at school. Can you explain what you mean by that? James Liu asked. I would sit in my car during their lunch recess and watch them play. Emma is so beautiful and Jake is so sweet. I could tell they needed more attention than they were getting. Sometimes I would follow their school bus to see which stop they got off at, just to make sure they were safe. The prosecutor let that testimony hang in the air for a moment. Ms. Morrison, you purchased car seats and children's clothing before approaching the children at school. Can you explain why? I wanted them to be comfortable when they came home with me. Marcus and I had talked about me being their new mother, and I wanted to be prepared. I bought Emma some beautiful dresses and Jake some toy cars. I even set up bedrooms for them in my apartment. Rachel's confession to premeditation was devastating to her defense. The jury took less than 2 hours to find her guilty of attempted kidnapping in the second degree, stalking, and custodial interference. Judge Michael Rodriguez sentenced her to 5 years in state prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. Ms. Morrison, your actions represent a calculated attempt to abduct someone else's children, based on a delusion that you could be a better parent than their actual mother. You stalked these children for weeks, documented their routines, and purchased supplies for your planned abduction. Only the quick thinking of a 6-year-old prevented a tragic outcome. But the story wasn't over. During Rachel's trial, additional evidence had emerged about Marcus's role in enabling her behavior. The text messages between them showed that Marcus had not only complained about me extensively, but had also explicitly discussed Rachel becoming the children's real mom and had shared information about our custody schedule specifically, so Rachel could accidentally encounter the children during his off days. James Liu referred this evidence to the district attorney's office for review. 3 weeks after Rachel's sentencing, Marcus was charged as an accessory to stalking and custodial interference. His attorney, Richard Stone, tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA's office was unwilling to compromise on charges involving child endangerment. Marcus's trial was set for 4 months later, but he never made it to trial. 2 weeks before the scheduled court date, Richard Stone approached Margaret about a plea agreement. Marcus would plead guilty to reckless endangerment and contributing to the delinquency of a minor, accept a 2-year suspended sentence with supervised probation, agree to relinquish all parental rights to Emma and Jake, and pay for their therapy and counseling needs until they reached adulthood. Margaret and I discussed the plea offer extensively. While part of me wanted Marcus to face the full consequences of his actions in a public trial, the more important consideration was protecting Emma and Jake from further trauma. Dr. Foster had made it clear that both children were still struggling with anxiety and trust issues, and prolonging the legal proceedings would likely worsen their emotional state. I agreed to the plea deal with one additional condition. Marcus would be required to pay child support as if he still had partial custody, but all his parental rights would be terminated permanently. He would have no right to contact Emma and Jake, to information about their lives, or to any role in their upbringing. On November 15th, exactly 8 months after Rachel Morrison had first approached my children at school, Marcus White stood in Judge Kowalski's courtroom and relinquished all rights to his children forever. Mr. White, do you understand that by accepting this plea agreement, you are permanently severing your legal relationship with your minor children? You will have no right to custody, visitation, or even information about their welfare? Marcus's voice was barely audible. Yes, Your Honor. Do you understand that this decision is irrevocable? You cannot change your mind in 6 months or 6 years and ask for these rights to be restored? Yes, Your Honor. Very well. The court accepts your plea of guilty to reckless endangerment and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. You are sentenced to 2 years suspended incarceration with supervised probation, and all your parental rights are hereby terminated permanently. As I sat in that courtroom watching my ex-husband give up his children forever, I felt an unexpected wave of sadness. Not for him, his choices had led to this moment, but for Emma and Jake, who would grow up knowing their father had chosen a woman he'd known for 4 months over his relationship with them. But as that sadness passed, it was replaced by something stronger: peace. My children were safe. The woman who'd stalked them was in prison. The man who'd enabled that stalking was out of our lives permanently. And for the first time in over a year, I could focus entirely on helping Emma and Jake heal and move forward. The financial settlement from Marcus's required support payments would ensure Emma and Jake could attend college without student loans. The therapy Dr. Foster recommended was already helping both children process their trauma and rebuild their sense of security. Emma had stopped asking about the strange lady, and Jake's nightmares had finally stopped. 6 months later, I received a letter from the Colorado Department of Corrections. Rachel Morrison was requesting permission to write to me from prison, claiming she wanted to apologize for her actions. I shredded the letter without reading it completely. Some apologies aren't worth hearing, and some people don't deserve forgiveness. A year later, Emma and Jake were thriving. Emma had joined the school safety patrol and was teaching other children about stranger danger. Jake had started kindergarten and was excelling in his classes. Both children were in ongoing therapy, but Dr. Foster reported that their anxiety levels were now within normal ranges for children who'd experienced trauma. As for me, I'd been promoted to senior paralegal at Margaret's firm, specializing in family law cases involving child endangerment. The experience with Rachel and Marcus had taught me things about family law that no textbook could convey, and I was using that knowledge to help other parents protect their children from similar situations. Marcus moved to Phoenix 6 months after his plea deal. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd gotten engaged to someone new. Another whirlwind romance, another woman he barely knew. I felt sorry for her, but it was no longer my concern. He was no longer my concern. Rachel Morrison is scheduled for release in 2028. When that happens, the restraining order will ensure she can't come within 1,000 feet of Emma, Jake, or me. But honestly, I don't spend much time thinking about her release date. She's a closed chapter in our story, and we've moved on to writing much better chapters. The most important lesson I learned from this experience wasn't about legal procedures or criminal justice, though I learned plenty about both. The most important lesson was about trusting my instincts as a mother and as a professional. When something feels wrong, it usually is wrong. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. And when someone threatens your children, you use every legal tool at your disposal to protect them. Emma is now 8 years old and wants to be a police detective when she grows up. So I can catch bad guys like the lady who tried to take me and Jake. Jake is 6 and has no conscious memory of Rachel Morrison, which is exactly how I want it to stay. They both know they can trust me to keep them safe, and that's the most important thing. Sometimes people ask me if I feel guilty about destroying Marcus's life or breaking up his relationship with Rachel. The answer is simple. I didn't destroy anything. Marcus made choices that endangered our children, and he faced the natural consequences of those choices. Rachel Morrison chose to stalk and attempt to kidnap 2 innocent children, and she's serving the sentence she earned. I sleep well at night because Emma and Jake are safe in their beds, because the people who threaten them are facing appropriate consequences, and because I use the legal system exactly as it was designed to be used, to protect children from adults who would harm them. That's not revenge. That's justice. And sometimes, when the system works properly, they're the same thing. The last text message I ever received from Marcus came 3 weeks after his plea deal. I hope someday Emma and Jake will understand that I loved them. I deleted it without responding. Because someday, when my children are old enough to understand the full story, they'll know that love isn't just a feeling. It's a series of choices. And their father chose an unstable stranger over their safety. They'll also know that their mother chose them every single time without hesitation or regret. And that made all the difference.